Thanks for joining us. We are talking about the trust measurement of how people view things. And of course, joining us in the studio is Arun Menon, who will be talking about the Ipsos Trust Track, talking about how trusted corporations and institutions are, not just in Malaysia, but around the globe as well. Arun, thanks for taking the time to come over to the studio to talk to us about this. What's important about the trust track is that you track it over years, and because of this, the trust index has indeed gone up from 46 to 50, 56, and has remained consistent from 2021 to 2022. I want to know what it means. What does 56 mean, and is it showing more trust or less trust than before?
So thank you, Ibrahim, for having me and Ipsos at the show. So you're rightly so. The trust has improved mostly during the COVID pandemic years, right? And then it kind of has plateaued or stabilized between last year to this year. So what we see from that is that mostly people seems to be, the trust level hasn't changed much at the overall consumers or the general public in Malaysia. What we have seen in increased period is that there's a lot of activation activities during pandemic years from the government side, the institution side, to support a lot of the people. Now we are seeing as a normalization of these things. Okay, that's all good and it's all reflected in the trust. So trust is like a reservoir. You build it up, right? So whenever there's a crisis, you can utilize that trust, right? So then they will give you a benefit of doubt. Okay, this company has helped me at the time when I need it. I will let it go if there is a crisis, right? Now it's kind of plateaued in the sense that people have seen what companies can do, and there is nothing new coming out from the companies as such from what it has been. So they are meeting the expectations that the general public has. Having said that, you would notice that it's not the same all across. At the overall level, it's stable, but there is a huge changes when it comes to private sector and public sector companies.
All right, let's talk about that right now. So as you can see right now on the screen, there's different varying levels of fluctuating trust in across the sectors, from GLCs to public regulators, FMCG, automotive, media, entertainment, telecom, and financial services. Let's talk about the increase or the decrease in the trust within the sectors.
So what we have seen is that, and it's for some years as such, the government and government-linked companies tends to be stable in Malaysia in terms of trust level, right? So it's almost the same. So the few minor points here and up and down, right? But we have seen two categories. We track around 15 categories and around 125 brands at the overall trust track. And in that 15 categories, we see two categories as gaining on trust level. That's mostly on the FMCG or the consumer good category, and also on the media and entertainment segments. So there's two segments which we see that, huge lift in terms of sector. So though it's overall the kind of stable, but there is movement for specific categories.
And of course, one item that we need to touch on is that some companies are more trusted than others. In this case, EPF and Petronas are the two most trusted brands in the country. Why is that so, you think?
Okay. So EPF and Petronas was the most trusted last year as well. And in case of Petronas, from the time that we've been tracking, it is either in number 1 and number 2 at the overall level, right? So that's also quite different in Malaysia, and oil and oil company being as the top trusted company, right? It's not the same across the globe. Yeah. That shows the difference is that in Malaysia, we attach a lot of personal attachment to emotions to Petronas, right? And EPF at also the time, especially benefited from the last 2 years in the sense that the benefit that the general public has got in terms of from the EPF over the period of time, right? So it's also gives the implication that if there anything goes wrong, I have an EPF account which potentially can support me. So that's the backstory of the EPF. But Petronas has been a brand which has been quite strongly trusted by Malaysia because it's considered as one of the national icons or national jewel, right? So, and it's been there in that position for a long period of time. And they built it consistently over many years.
What I want to talk about is actually specifically Petronas. I live in the KLCC area, and you can see Petronas branding everywhere. In fact, I can't turn around without seeing the Petronas brand. And they espouse the fact that they do work in the community and the fact that they are a little bit more environmentally conscious, more than most energy companies. But what I find interesting is that they actually walk the talk, because I was on a boat ride off Kota Kinabalu and off to Pulau Gaya, where it's quite bad when it comes to the poverty level there. But even at that, place of Pulau Gaya, of Kota Kinabalu, there's a lot of work that Petronas is doing for the communities there. From serving out notices saying that don't go to the oil rigs, or the ability for them to actually spend on putting kids off Pulau Gaya into schools. So it's really, and I wasn't even looking for this, right? So as you can see, they are everywhere when it comes to branding and the work that they do, from KL City Centre to KLCC all the way to Pulau Gaya and Kota Kinabalu. But surely this is something that is, needs to be seen by most companies as well. This is how you build trust. What do you think?
Absolutely. What Petronas that we call is a solid trust, right? So you are aware because it is, it is present in all our life on a day-to-day basis. You're familiar, and the opinion is favorable about the company, and that's led to a trust level, right? So that's how you build trust over a period of time, and that's what Petronas has done, right? So, and people beyond the day-to-day, they also are very conscious of the overall contribution of Petronas to the economy, and as you said, the CSR activity, the sustain. It's a way of life for that organization, right? So as you said, that's probably something the other companies can learn from.
One item that I want to explore also is on some brands that we don't normally associate with trust or industries, like for instance telecommunication. We always complain of the fact that internet is slow or drop calls and other stuff like that, but it seems like Maxis is rather trustworthy. We're looking at insurance as well and financial services. Prudential is one of them, and of course mobile wallet. Everybody talks about Touch and Go lately, but Touch and Go is also seen as a trustworthy brand. So how do we marry the pedestrian understanding of how brands work with the trust levels that is seen associated with these brands?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it has to from what is actually driving my trust, right? That's because there are some reason because of which I will trust the brand, and it's kind of keep changing over a period of time. So there are brands that we associate strongly trusted, right? So if I'm in 2021, 2020, I would consider I trust a brand because how they are able to manage the crisis. They have strong, capable leadership. So that's kind of helps me into that, trust those brands. And in 2021, they were looking for are they open and honest in their communication whenever they communicate the others? And also do they actually put the customers first in 2021, just when the pandemic is gradually fading away, right? In this year, it's kind of came back to the normalcy of 2019. They're looking, are you actually delivering on what you committed, right? So in a lot of the brands, if they're actually fulfilling their promises, and some of the brands that you mentioned, right? If they are fulfilling that promises, then they are fulfilling. And interesting, as you mentioned about Touch and Go, it has become increasingly ingrained into my lifestyle. So I cannot dissociate as much with it, right? So it's much more relevant to my lifestyle now than what it used to be in the last 3 or 4 years, right? So that brand became much more ingrained. So that's where they actually building the trust level, right? So Touch and Go has been very stable and strong in terms of the trust level, and it's been building steadily.
We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss with Ipsos still on their Trust Track survey. We'll be right back after these messages. Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me Arun Menon joining me in the studio. He is, of course, the Managing Director of Ipsos. We're talking about Ipsos' Trust Survey. There's also this whole element of measuring national sentiment after the new government formation. And the question that was posed to the public was that, would you say things in this country are heading in the right direction? It seems like after GE14, it seems like there's a whole overwhelming idea of post-election euphoria. And of course, this is not seen as much in the GE15 aftermath, I call it. But it's still, both are consistent in the sense that we had a very pessimistic view of the election. When the election has come and passed, it seems like there is a boost in national sentiment. Is this always the case for other countries, for instance, when you measure these Trust Track survey on national sentiment across elections across many markets, or is it just one of those peculiar things that Malaysia is facing?
You're right. It is generally seen across the countries after the elections, particularly when there seems to be a change of government. That's where recently in Brazil, which they have just passed the election, you can see that a huge momentum shift in terms of sentiment as well, right? So there's two aspects that we see. Just when we go to the election, as you can see, either in G14 or 15, the scores, whether the country is in the right direction, only 40% of Malaysians thinks that the country is in the right direction. And then it's kind of boost up in the next, wave onwards, right? So what we see is that when you go to election, there is a lot of uncertainty, unpredictability, what's going to happen. That's also kind of boosts down the sentiment a lot more, right? Then when there is a change of government, okay, then there is, as you said, a euphoria sentiment to say that I'm going to send in the right direction. So we asked two questions. What do you see the overall outlook of the next year, right, as 2023, as we span out? And what is your immediate outlook? So the immediate outlook, as you can see, the economic confidence and sentiment has picked up quite a bit, right? But the overall outlook, it's still slightly pessimistic for Malaysia and across the globe. Right, because they see that interest rates are going to go up. Everybody thinks that it's going to go up, right? They see there's going to be more because across the world there is tech companies are laying off, and there is this unemployment issues which is generally prevalent. So immediately we see a lot of positive sentiment, which is post-election and everything, new government, new policies and everything. We have seen till January. And the same thing as well. Last election after G15, after a couple of months, it started fading down.
Speaking of which, so we're already talking about this particular graphics here. A mix of concerns replacing singular COVID-19 focus. You were measuring three items: COVID-19, political corruption, and of course inflation, or I guess the economy. And it is steadily showing the rise of the percentages of people worried about inflation. And is it fair to say also the economy as well, or it's specifically on inflation?
Primarily on the inflation part.
Okay.
So what we have seen is that sometimes from September 2021, that inflation has been creeping up as one of the main concerns, right? You can see it start up now. Around 43% are concerned about inflation. Very similar globally, also around 40% of the people that we survey as concerned about inflation. So it's very much the case, and people are expecting the prices will continue to rise.
But what is also interesting is the top 10 concerns of Malaysians versus global country average. We're talking about inflation, 40% global country average, Malaysia about 43%. But what is different from Malaysia versus global country average is that corruption is very high in terms of the concerns. Actually, I'm one of them. I'm one of these guys in terms of worried about corruption. And of course, COVID-19. Is this, because I saw the graphics before, there was an uptick in terms of the worrisome of COVID-19. It was dropping steadily over the past few months. Is this because of the reopening of China?
Absolutely, you're on the dot on that one. Whenever that, so Malaysian tends to be highly sensitive to COVID-19 compared to the rest of the world, what we have generally tracked. So when there is any surge, like for example, when China is opening, a lot of communication around, the issues in China with COVID, then definitely that uptick. But financial political corruption, as you can see, is that a constant line which has been underplayed as a worry of every Malaysian. So almost around 40 to 50% Malaysians are always concerned about it. So we've been tracking it for the last 4 to 5 years. It was always there as one underlying worry or a concern for Malaysians.
And this is the graphics that I want to talk about. The economic sentiment hike in post-election climate. It is consistent across the kind of other surveys that we are reading. The current status and the economy in 6 months both are showing worrisome elevation of elevated levels of worrisome amongst Malaysians. And this is indeed the number one topic of the day in terms of what people are worried about today. Do you feel that the economy is, the worry on economics is still going to be there for months to come until and unless we see some sort of resolution coming in from, say, the government or some companies actually addressing this?
So the current sentiment, which is positive, right, the economic sentiment post-election immediately as such, right, that's partly because of there is a general sentiment that the ringgit is strengthened over the last few months across the US dollars. There's a lot of positive news immediately after the elections, right? Whether, as you rightly said, whether we can actually maintain this stream of positive news, and that's something which is going to help us, to continue to go the economic sentiment up, right? And there's going to be a divergence what we see across the Malaysia and the wider Asian region compared to Europe and the US, right? The same individual in US and Europe is much more concerned about the economy and the recession and everything, probably Malaysia is not as much, or the Southeast Asian countries are not as much worried about that. But still, we need a constant, steady stream of real planning and activation from the government side, and also a lot of positive, good news which helps the peoples to keep up that thing. Because with the sentiment, also spending. If I'm positive, then I would rather go buy this product. I'm more confident to invest in a property or buy a car, right? So sentiment is always linked to the purchase intention of people, and it's reflected in the business in general.
Okay, one more short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a bit more with Arun Menon of Ipsos. Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me Arun Menon of Ipsos. We need to talk about what drives trust. In this graphic that is presented by Ipsos, it shows the quadrants on the strongest on trust key elements. And you guys have grouped it into 4 elements: delivering on promises, having a proud heritage, strong and capable leadership, and providing products and services that are relevant to people's lifestyles and needs. And because of this, it seems to beg that question of why is it that people sometimes trust a brand even though they have lousy services and products, and inversely, some brands have excellent products and services but they are still deemed as untrustworthy. How do you move towards trying to get people to trust your products and services a little bit more? Of course, this is more towards academic conversation, but indeed, a lot of companies are asking the same questions as well.
So we measure trust continuously over time. We have seen there is a pattern in terms of in some industries and sectors people trust versus some industries by default they don't trust, right? So if you are a pharmaceutical company, you tends to be more trusted at this point of time compared to a social media company, which is least trusted, right? It's the same. The doctors and teachers are the most trusted profession. Politicians and the government officials are the least trusted. Right? So there is already, even if you are a good politician, right? If there are good politicians, of course, then
there's no, but yes.
So it's a much more difficult for them to gain trust than somebody who is, someone who is working as a doctor or a technology, right? Sometimes we kind of give trust in because of the professions or the sectors that we are. So some companies, by the benefit of certain sector or industries, they automatically gain trust. In Malaysia, government-linked companies, right? Because of the stability and the support with the government, so they tends to be much more trusted. So if you are, so you have, I wouldn't say less work that you have to do, because sometimes the trust is given, just because you are part of that industry. But someone who is on the other side of the space, right? For example, if you are in the media and entertainment, you have to gain trust over the period of time. So one of the things that we have noticed is huge shift when it comes to media companies, right? News channels and media platform gaining trust over the period of time. It's partly seen, for example, the Star gaining 18 points, overall the industry gaining 15 points, partly because of they're much more familiar of these channels during the election times, right? And they are thoroughly reading and engaging this platform, which actually gained them the trust over this period of time, right? So, but on the other side, you have TNB and Plus, which we would consider as what if you will only worried if the there is a roadblock or the electricity is not coming, right? But these are the ones which is associated with one of the core aspect. They deliver on their promise. The simple aspect of TNB is that there is an uninterrupted power supply. They deliver on it and they are trusted for that, right? But if there are frequent disruptions, then they are going to suffer heavily. And as I said, touch and go, as you say in the next bucket, right? It's because it's now unavoidable as part of my lifestyle if I don't have the wallets with me, right? So that's the way it's company. So it's an evolving aspect. We cannot say that last year I'm trusted, that means that it's kind of given. You need to continue to invest in that, right? So in terms of your brand, in terms of your customer proposition, and again the activities, how you're contributing to the society, ESG becomes a big part of it. So that's something which we would evolve, right? So if you're a business leader, how would you decide
which quadrant, so to speak, is to build on the brand and to build on trust with your stakeholders? Is there a choice for us to harp on a particular area, or is it more of a holistic approach and move as a collective across these 4 quadrants?
So so trust comes with familiarity, right? If you're not familiar with a brand, right, there are a lot of brands which I am not familiar, then definitely there is no trust in those brands, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know much about you. Like,
No trust and untrustworthy could be
Exactly.
different, right?
yes, it could be.
Yeah.
Just, for example, it's just if you are in a, say, for example, a social media space or those kind of
Yeah.
companies, right? If I am not very familiar, just because you are in that category, automatically I'm less likely to trust you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So the more people are aware of you, it's more likely that you gain their trust and understanding, right? So the visibility of your brand becomes very important, right? Then as going to it, are you visible for the right reasons, right? So where you've been communicated, like where your social media and the public engagements and assets, right? So it's not just the company, even the leadership. A lot of times people look at the organization based on their leadership, right? So your leadership, there's a lot of people are saying that I would want to see the leadership, like, we know that some of the global brands are known for their, CEOs and the leaders, right? So they also carry that personality, reflect it onto the brand. Sometimes they're bigger than the brand, sometimes they aid to the brand as well. They also contribute. But then your regular brand building activities, which is your day-to-day activities, you are, making sure that your products are relevant, our brand is quite strongly engaging and, in line with what the moving, consumer expectations. So those are the other day-to-day part of every organizations.
Finally, I want to explore on some of the 2013 ideas that you can share with us. Businesses are really thinking hard about how to optimize their resources, both financial and non-financial. Say, for instance, the tech sector, they've culled so many thousands of jobs globally. In Malaysia, we're looking at some businesses even winding up because the inability for them to maintain strong cash flows in the months to come. Surely, the economic condition of the country is indeed at a worrying level. What would be some of the key ideas that you can share with us when it comes to business owners and business leaders? What would they need to do or think about or prioritize for this year to come?
That's quite a broad question, but so what we generally describe our current state is called polycrisis. You have multiple crises,
yeah.
right? And
why isn't that like the norm now?
yes,
Polycrisis every day?
polycrisis, right? So, and the point is also some crises lead into other crises, right? For example, the war is leading to inflation, and the inflation leading into issues, as you said, the companies has to struggle, and then they have to make the people redundant. So it's just one leading to each other, and it's one of the things is very complicated for an individual company or an individual government to address, right? So that it's, some of these responses has to be much more coordinated, right? Say, for example, the government of Malaysia responding, whereas in the rest of the industries and others is not in line with that response, then it's actually fails the purpose, right? So that's where the coordination of the responses is something that we also seen, like even during the COVID crisis, like each country behaves slightly differently from the others, right? So if we have coordinated the responses across, that's good. Even now the interest rate, one country increase, that the other countries are forced to follow, right? So a lot of the Malaysia rate hike has to match with the US because otherwise cash will flow out of Malaysia, right? So those are the things. So there are things which is purely not in the control of the government and the others as such. So the one of the things that we can do, I think, as a country is that the supply, availability of supply, because one of the things which impact the people on the ground at our B40 and others is the cost of living, which has increased, right? And one way of doing it is probably making sure the products are available at much more affordable prices. So the sourcing the supply for these products are something which is going to, and it will help the companies as well in the process, right? So probably encouraging more local sourcing or making sure that we source from countries which is at much more reasonable rates. So these are the things which I'm just saying like a very tactical way of addressing it, at least for one crisis, which is the inflation. It's something which we can do as a country.
Finally, I want to explore the mechanism of Ipsos conducting these trust surveys. What would be some of the questions that you ask, and what is the methodology running behind it?
So our research comes from two surveys. One is a longitudinal survey, which is like every month we speak to around 20,000 plus people across 28 countries across the world, right? So you get the pulse of how things are and then what the direction and everything. Malaysia is one of the countries that we track, right? And the economic sentiment and others we get from there. But we also need a bit of deep dive into Malaysia when it comes to trust on institutions. As I said, that one we do over the period of the latest results are from 2022. Over 6 months, we have done around 6,000 interviews covering 15 categories and around 125 brands. So that's quite a robust, nationally representative face-to-face, like, we meet to people if we know there is a person who answered to that survey. There's two surveys which we conduct so that we get a much more a global perspective and how does Malaysia fit into that global perspective. And within Malaysia, how does it reflect by each industry or institutions.
Fantastic. Arun, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. That was Arun Menon, the Managing Director of Ipsos. Ipsos is, of course, a consumer insight company. They do a lot of these surveys. Do check them out if you have the time and opportunity for it. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.